The last time I did a tour of my basement woodworking shop was over on the Black Bear Forge channel. This year I thought I would show you the updates here on the John Switzer channel, and I think this is probably where most of the woodworking stuff will be going forward. Of course, the heart of any workshop is the workbench. This bench is a Roubeau style bench, big, heavy, simple workbench, not overly complicated. The legs on this bench are made out of 5.5 inch by 7 inch timbers. The top are 5 inch square Doug fir. I think they were Doug, yeah. The top is 5 inch thick Doug fir that were laminated together. These were just construction posts for the top. There was something somebody had left over from a home project. They were porch posts meant to hold up a porch roof. Not the best wood in the world, but it has served just fine for this workbench. And they were free at the time. I did add some oak on either side of this, both to make the outer edges a little bit more durable, but also I was a little bit skinnier than I wanted to be for this bench, so I wanted to add a little bit of width to it. And the oak did that and gave me a place to put some dog holes. Of course, I've got dog holes all the way across the front for use with an end vise. This is a Lee Nielsen end vise. I've got some slots for tools back here in the back, and I can put different tools I'm working with there so I don't knock them off the bench. I don't use those very much. I tend to just put things on this other bench over here. But this bench has a shelf under it, but it doesn't have any drawers or cabinets, anything like that. Just real simple. Has some holes for holdfasts. Very functional bench, 2 feet wide, 10 feet long. As far as vices go, like I said, I've got a Lee Nielsen end vise over on the right side, and I have a record vise here. For a while I had a leg vise with a big tall wooden chop. Looked really cool, really the style of bench I was going for, but I wasn't as happy with the way it held as I am with the record vise. The record holds really well. And when I found that at Woodworking in America last year, I swapped the vices out. All the mechanics for the other vise are still here. I could put it back at any time, and there is room. I could have both vices on there if I wanted. Not that it would function very well, because one vise would compete with the other, but they could both be bolted in place if I really had to have the other vise for a little while. The record is probably never coming off. It was kind of a pain to install. Now this back bench that is all piled up with all sorts of oddball stuff is my older bench. I probably made this bench 25 years ago, maybe, something like that, maybe even longer than that. It's been moved from house to house multiple times, and it was made out of old pallet lumber. Everybody's making coffee tables out of pallet lumber. I made a workbench. These pallets were something that countertops came on. I think they were big marble countertops. So these are big, heavy oak pallets. They had 8-foot long timbers on some of them. Some I think might have even been 10-foot long. And they were generally 3x4 timbers. So this is all glued up out of those 3x4 oak timbers. The oak legs, I think, are still some of that pallet lumber. The front face on this, again, was something I bought and added on. It's a maple front face. And that was just to help provide something a little bit taller here. The top is really only about that thick, so the maple board just gives it the appearance of a thicker top and gives me some more clamping surface to the front, because I can get a clamp in under there if I need to. This one was built almost exclusively with hand tools. I think I might have borrowed a table saw, and a buddy at work had connections with a commercial cabinet shop that we made arrangements to go in and plane the top down. After I got it all glued up, we ran the top through their big planer. And that's the only reason this is even close to flat. Unfortunately, it wasn't real dimensionally stable. It was pallet lumber, and it moved a little bit. It's been planed a little here and a little there. So it isn't a perfectly flat work surface, but it's a pretty good solid bench. I haven't really regretted this. I never finished it. It's supposed to have drawers and cabinet doors under here. This is going to be just a real classic kind of a shaker style bench, I guess. But I still haven't gotten around to doing the drawers and the doors. Something that's on my to-do list that maybe I'll get around to this week. Yeah, not a chance. It has two vices on it. It's got this 5-inch Craftsman bench vise I probably had for 30 years. And it was not originally meant for this bench. I was going to put an end vise on here, but I never got around to it. So I filled that in. So that's an added on section just to hold that vise. It has a smaller record vise. I've had that for about as long as I've had this bench. I don't think it's the first vise that was on here, but it's been one I've been real happy with. And that's one of the reasons I wanted a record for the other bench, is because I knew I really liked this. And I found myself coming over to this bench and using this vise when I would have preferred to have worked on the other bench, just because I like the way this held better. The back wall is done with French cleats. It's a pretty functional system. I kind of like it. Maybe not as wonderful as I'd hoped it'd be, but it's still easy to change things around, and I think it's way better than a pegboard. It just has some chisels on it, squares, hammers, bench hooks, and all of my charging stuff for cordless tools is over here right now. That's something that kind of is in a situation of flux most of the time, and I got a better place for it that I'll have to get around to one of these days. But for now, this is pretty functional. The bench does collect a lot of stuff. When I'm working over here, this is kind of where I stage parts and tools. There's a bunch of parts for the loom that are stacked up over here. And right now, I've got the miter saw sitting over here because I don't have a dedicated place for the miter saw. Not real functional over here because it's a little bit crowded, so when I really need it, I move it over to the main bench, but then it's in the way here, so it gets moved back and forth. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I'll get a dedicated spot for the miter saw set up. It's one of those tools that I bought. That's one of those tools I bought just to make building the looms easier, and it's been a really good saw so far. Over in this corner, I have a drill press. This is a drill press that I've had for probably 30 years. It's one of the first big power tools I ever bought, and it's a cheap one. It's a Taiwanese drill press. It said it was made in 1986, but it still works. The mechanism for tightening the belts does not work. That broke loose a while back. I think I can fix it, but I got to get down into this cast iron head and figure out what it is I got to do. So I may need some sort of really long skinny tools or somebody with small hands to work on it. But it hadn't been a big deal. I can push the motor back by hand and tighten it down if the belt gets loose. Mostly I just leave it on its slowest setting, and it hasn't been a big deal so far. Now, if you saw the last shop tour, you know that the drill press used to sit over here right next to this cabinet that's got a lot of extra drill bits and things that are drill press related in it. And this little shelf has a bunch of drill bits on it, the stuff that I use most of the time. There's a set of regular twist drills and a set of brad point drills. Forstner bits, things like that are all stored here. Also, I had clamps over here in this corner the last time we did a tour. The drill press has been moved, the clamps have been moved so they're easier to get to. I'll look at that in a minute. And this is where I hope to put the miter saw. There's some other stuff going on over here that I'm going to have to deal with. I think that'll be a whole video on its own to deal with the miter saw station and at least get it built and get this corner cleaned out a little bit more. Which will also probably mean that I move this cabinet because I want to because ultimately I want to build a cabinet under the drill press with drawers, put it on wheels. So if I need the drill press for something longer, I can move it out here in the middle of the shop as needed. Things on wheels are nice. I wouldn't like my workbenches on wheels because I like them to be good and stable, but a drill press on wheels would be a nice thing. Now coming around the corner over there, we were just right over here, I've got some storage cabinet. These are old hardware storage cabinets. I still haven't got these completely organized. It's one of those ongoing projects. But if I ever get labels made for all of this, this is going to be a really handy place to store all the nuts, the bolts, the screws, the brads, nails. I've got square cut nails, and a lot of this stuff is full. So there's all sorts of stuff from construction quality screws in here. Here's some of those cut nails from Tremont Nails. That's kind of stuff is here. There's a cabinet here, and there's a cabinet over here. There's a doorway going into a hallway, and that goes back to where I do most of my packing and shipping when I'm packing stuff for the blacksmith shop. But these are really handy. It really helps organize things. I just need to make sure everything gets labeled and find all the other small stuff they can fill up some of these empty drawers. Oh, we walked right by my sharpening bench. This is kind of a shambles right now. It's another project I need to finish. But this is kind of an area that I dedicated for sharpening. I don't always sharpen over here, but I've got a slow speed grinder with CBN wheels and some guides for doing gouges, chisels, and mostly the turning tools. Most of my hand tools I prefer to sharpen by hand. I usually do that over on the other bench. But this is a project that we're going to have to finish one of these days, and hopefully we'll have a video or a couple of videos on how I organize all this and get this under control so it's a much better, more useful place to sharpen tools. That brings us over to where the clamps have been moved to. This is a chimney chase. This goes all the way up through the house, and down here it's cinder block, and there's a wood stove over here. But I had this empty hole here that didn't have a good purpose. Sometimes it gets some firewood in it, but I don't burn a fire down here in the wood stove all that often anyways. So I decided to make a rolling clamp rack. And this is now where all of my clamps are, or the majority of my clamps are stored. There's still some over that window over there. But the longer pipe clamps are over here. And all of the oddball clamps are in here. The spring clamps and short bar clamps and hand screws. There's some C-clamps in there, picture frame clamps. This thing swallowed up just about all of my clamps really nicely. If you're looking for video on this, that's one I actually did over on the Black Bear Forge channel. It was a two-part series, and I'll link to the first part of that right up here. On the other hand, I've also thought about moving that video, or at least posting a copy of it here on this channel if I'm going to start doing more woodworking over here. So I don't know, what do you think? Should I bring that video over here, or are you perfectly happy to jump between channels and go watch it over on the blacksmithing channel? The little hallway just goes back to the other part of the basement, got storage and stuff back there. And while some of it's woodworking related, it's not really part of the tour. Just stuff that's stored back there. But here I have my lathe. This is an old Rockwell Delta lathe. I got this out of a high school shop in Wyoming. They were advertising it on eBay. I managed to win the bid. I think they had two of them, so I got one. Somebody else got the other one. And I was afraid at the time that they were actually shutting down their shop. There was no going to be any more wood shop in that school, which is disappointing. But there's no reason to let the tool go if you can get a hold of the tool, because that decision was already made. Luckily, that wasn't the case. They were actually upgrading. They were getting some much nicer equipment into that shop. So I was able to get this old one. It's not perfect. It's got a little bit of run out. The tailstock doesn't like to stay clamped down. The bolts slip and things don't hold real well. But it is functional, and I do enjoy using it. I would like to do a lot more wood turning. Lots of things I would like to do, including some bowls. So hopefully this lathe is going to get some more use. It was originally 3-phase. Luckily, it was easy to swap out for a single-phase motor, and it runs just fine on a single-phase motor. Now, shoehorned into this corner where I used to have my wood storage rack, which is now over there, I have a new Harvey Alpha bandsaw. This is one of my big splurges last year. I had a couple of windfalls that gave me some extra money that I wasn't normally expecting. Money that I probably won't have in the future, and I decided to invest heavily in the wood shop when this money came in, and there are a couple of tools that I bought that we'll look at. But my old bandsaw just didn't do everything I wanted it to do. This one has a huge resaw capacity, and so far it has been dead on accurate. I haven't had to mess around with a lot of adjustments to get it to work right. It just works right, and it's been a really nice saw. Has an easy blade tension. I don't have to sit here and crank the knob to get the blade tension right every time. And I can take the tension off the blade will last a lot longer. The old saw, the only way to take the tension off is with the upper knob, and it was a real pain to get it just right. So everything about this saw I have really liked. I'm glad to have it. It's been a real asset in the shop. Now my rack for wood storage moved from where the bandsaw is now over here, I don't remember exactly what I had over here. Oh, I do. I had another little workbench that never got used because it just got piled up with stuff. So this is a better place for the wood storage. It's an absolute mess right now. After working on these looms, I've got all sorts of small cutoffs, and I think a lot of them are useful. I think I'm going to try and figure out some projects to do. You know, in the blacksmith shop, we did a scrap bucket challenge for a while, where we just took the cut off stuff that wasn't real useful and found a way to make it useful. I think a lot of this lumber, I'm going to do the same sort of approach. Look at what it is, think about it, come up with something creative to do it. And we'll look at making videos about that stuff as we move forward with more woodworking videos here on the John Switzer channel. But mostly this is just all of the cutoffs and extra useful things. There's oak and maple and mahogany and lots of pine left over from the looms. Now, while I consider the workbench to be the heart of my shop, a lot of people would think that the table saw is the heart of the shop. I think that's very valid, and I can certainly agree with that. I still think the workbench is probably more important than the saw. This is another one of those splurges that we bought last year after going to Handworks. We had a really good show at Handworks, sold a lot of stuff, and I decided to invest in our top quality table saw. I have not regretted this purchase in the slightest. I've been really glad to have it. In fact, the loom project, if I had to rip all that material by hand, I probably would not have done it. The power tools really made that a lot easier to work on. So I'm glad to have this, and I'm going to get a lot more work done. Now, I used to have a table saw before we got the SawStop. It was a Craftsman contractor saw. I built a plywood cabinet for it to sit on, so it had wheels and a place to store accessories. And part of that was a router table extension, which I also added to this saw. Or not that router table, this is the router table extension SawStop sells to go with the saw on this one. But that was a useful tool. The only reason I sold it, or at least the main reason I sold it, is because I realized I wasn't embracing hand tools the way I really thought I wanted to. I wanted to learn more about hand tool woodworking. And I thought, as long as that saw was in the shop, I was going to find reasons to use it instead of doing things with hand tools. And I think that was absolutely true. But the reality is that the next 10 years, I just didn't do as much woodworking without that table saw. I always put it off because it was going to take longer to do things with hand saws. And there's a lot of things around the house I think I would have gotten done if I'd had the power tools, even though they would have been a lot of fun to do with hand tools. I still like hand tools. I still use hand tools a lot. Even with this here, I will still reach for a handsaw quite often. Reach for hand planes very often. I use hand planes on almost every project down here. But the table saw gets some of the drudgery work done faster. It gets the long rips, the repetitive work. And the projects like the looms that we looked at previously really would not have gotten done if I was doing it all by hand. At least I don't think so. But this is a 3 horsepower cabinet saw. It's been a really good saw. I probably could have gotten by with the 1.5 horse version, but I had the power available down here, and I figured I would never regret getting the 3 horse, and I will probably never buy another table saw, so I might as well get the bigger one to start with. Of course, I got bigger ones, 5 horse, 7.5 horse. If you need a big saw, they make them. In the grand scheme of good table saws, this is pretty middle of the road. I have a Grizzly 6-inch joiner. It's one I bought used. It actually belonged to one of the viewers of the blacksmithing channel, saw the previous shop tour, and sent me an email, said, hey, I've got this joiner for sale if you want it. Checked it out, went ahead and bought it. I did upgrade it to a helical cutter. Makes a huge difference. I like the helical cutter head in there. I don't use it a lot, and I don't know that it's something that I would want to upgrade to a bigger joiner. One, I don't really have the room, but I'm still kind of on the fence of whether a joiner is really that important of a tool, especially when I've got this cabinet full of really nice hand planes. And for doing edge joining, those are a lot more pleasant to work with. But again, doing repetitive projects where you got a lot of board feet to run through, or lineal feet, I should say, a joiner is kind of nice to have. I can bring it out here, and I can put a block on the table saw to increase my infeed table height, or increase the increase the practical in-feed space, and then put a roller stand on the outfeed side to increase the outfeed length of this. And it works pretty well. It's not perfect. It's still kind of hard to get a board to balance on there if the board's more than about 2 or 3 feet long. But it does get the job done. Then I've got a DeWalt thickness planer. This is just a benchtop planer, lunchbox planer, people call it. And I have to take it from here and set it on the workbench to work with it. Hopefully I'll get a rolling cart for that made. It's another thing that's got to be moved out one way or the other to work with, but wheels would be really nice. This tool cabinet holds most of my hand tools. It's got my collection of planes. There's most of the standard bench plane sizes. I started at number 3. I don't have a 1 or a 2. And go up to a number 8. Almost never use the 7 or the 8. I use the 6 a lot, the 5 a lot. And then a handful of joinery planes, block planes, things like that. And a collection of hand saws. Like I said, I still really like working with hand tools. It just isn't always the most efficient, and sometimes I just need to get projects done. So I don't use them as much as I might like to, but I'm not about to do without them. So generally, that's my woodworking shop. I don't bring sheet goods down here. It is too much trouble to try and get a 4x8 sheet of plywood down here. I could if I had to. I have an outside stairwell. I can bring it in through the other end of the basement and get a 4x8 sheet of plywood down here. But generally, I break those down outside, bring them home in the pickup, set them out on sawhorses, and break it down in the driveway, and then bring the parts in here. I can bring longer boards in. 8-foot boards about all I want to bring down the usual stairs. But this end window over where the drill press used to be and where I plan to put the miter saw, I can open it up and I can bring as long a board down here as I want to. Total length of the shop is about 30 feet, although that stairwell that comes into here takes 4 feet out of that at that end, and the wood rack really isn't much usable shop space. It's just storage. The width at its widest is 15 feet. And that chimney chase where the wood stove and the clamp rack are takes some of that out of there. So it's not all usable stuff at 15 by 30, but it's not a bad size shop. Now I have some pretty nice stuff. I've been collecting tools for 40 years probably. I probably started collecting woodworking tools before I started collecting blacksmithing tools. If you watch the Black Bear Forge channel, you know I've been collecting blacksmithing tools for ages. So a lot of this stuff has been slowly acquired over years and has been from one shop to another, and has just followed me around for years. The hand tools have taken a really long time to acquire. The hand tools that I had the longest, I probably have had for close to 40 years, and there's some other tools in here that are probably that old as well. So I've been collecting for a long time. I know a lot of people watching don't have a shop like this. They're working out of their garage, and they're lucky if they have a contractor's table saw or maybe a job site table saw. You can get a lot of woodworking done with those tools. I just got to the point last year where I decided I want to have the shop that I want to have and the tools that I want to work with. So I splurged on some really nice tools. I don't anticipate having that kind of a windfall again anytime in the future. It really was kind of an unusual year. So I'm glad I invested the money at that point. But just because you see people using better tools or more expensive tools, doesn't necessarily mean they're better, than what you have in your shop, doesn't mean you can't do similar things, doesn't mean you can't learn from them or learn along with them. For me, working in this shop, I'm still learning. So as we share some woodworking projects, they may not be so much how-to, but more of what I'm thinking at the time. And a month later, I might take a different approach because I learned something new in the meantime. Anyways, thanks for watching. We'll see you for the next video.